Monsignor Moises Caroma Rivera, Pillar of Traditionalism in Mexico, Part 2. Father Moises Carmona, a model priest. Personal details. On October 31st, 1912, a terrible flood took place in Guerrero, and many houses were destroyed. The Carmona family was in immediate danger, and in order to be safe from the impetuous current, they went up to a loft as a last refuge. And providentially, the third child of Miss Maria Rivera Campos was born there. His father, Mr. Nicholas Carmona Sanchez, had him baptized and called him Moises, because he was saved from the waters. He received their first sacrament on April 24th, 1913, in Tixla, Guerrero. Mr. Nicholas was a hacienda minister, and as a result of the frequent abuse he received from the revolutionaries because of his administration of the hacienda, he died in April of 1914, leaving his wife to care for 2 girls and 2 boys. Probably due to the precarious situation Miss Maria Rivera had been through, Miss Natividad Carmona, sister of the deceased and rural teacher, took charge of young Moises, quote, whom he loved as if she were his real mother, end quote. For the first 2 years of primary education, young Moises studied in the town of Molishlan in the modest school where his aunt was a teacher. Wanting her young nephew to have a better education, she enrolled him in the Sacred Heart of Jesus School in the city of Chilapa. Here, they would teach him religious classes on Saturday mornings. Under the direction of the teachers, the students conducted their pious acts more assiduously. Quote, the month of Mary was very enthusiastically celebrated by us. Oh, what days these were! With what joy we sang, against Luzbel, against his anger, end quote. With the same emotion, he remembered the Calista persecution times, when Catholics were forced to wake up at 4 a.m. to assist Holy Mass, which was clandestinely celebrated in private homes and in small village. In 1929, at the age of 17, young Moises Carmona came close to entering high school in Ayutzingnipa, unaware of the school's Marxist tendency, at his Aunt Nadi's insistence. She wanted to help him become a man with good values, but didn't know the reason why Moises was loath to accept. He tried in vain to impose his refusal, but the aunt's strength would have won had it not been for the providential intervention of Father Rosalio Ojeda. This man, the parish priest for whom Moses served Mass, proposed that the young man study in the seminary, and Father Carmona was always grateful to this good priest for having liberated him from the claws of Marxism, and because, quote, thanks to him, and God willing, I became a priest, end quote. In 1929, he joined the seminary, and in 1939, he was ordained a priest at the hand of His Excellency Bishop Leopoldo Diaz Esquerdo. He celebrated his first Mass in St. Anthony's Parish Church, located in Buena Vista of Sular, Guerrero, since it was in this church he had spent 1 year, the year he spent out of seminary, directing the Catholic Association of Mexican Students and the Mexican Catholic Female Student Union in his fight against the scholastic education imposed by Cardenas. At the end of that month, he was appointed auxiliary vicar of La Soledad Parish Church in Acapulco, with the elderly parish priest Florentino Diaz. Father Carmona admits that he learned a great deal from this venerable old man. He was mainly in charge of Catholic action and catechesis. As a curious note, he remembered that during his stay there, he was frequently followed by a man who finally invited Father Carmona to join Freemasonry. Of this he said, quote, if I didn't know what Freemasonry is, and all the evil it had caused all over the world, I could easily have been deceived, end quote. This is the way any honest priest would answer, no matter how young, because the church trained them well for their defense. This firm attitude of the first years of his priestly life would be the same he would use to defend Holy Church from its detractors after Vatican II. I want to make this clear because there may be some that think Father Carmona, like many that call themselves traditional, suffered emotional problems that might make him take this intransigent attitude against the conciliar reforms that were promoted by the Church after the Council. These false reasons are usually presented by the modernists to discredit the unconditional soldier of Christ. In 1941, he was appointed Latin and Castilian professor of the Conciliar Seminary of Chilapia. In 1944, he was sent to Coyuca and Benitez with the intention of counteracting the increase of Protestant influence. He organized the faithful of several towns to make a great and public manifestation of their faith. With this, the adversaries backed off. Concerning this, Father Carmona, with his usual frankness, later said, quote, "It upset us that, after fighting so much against Luther's children, they are now our brothers and sisters," end quote. In 1952, he was transferred as a parish priest and extraterritorial vicar of Omtecpec. On April 12, 1959, the Bishop of Acapulco, Jose del Pilar Quezada, appointed him a parish priest to the Divine Providence Church of that city. There he first devoted his time to embellishing the buildings he received as a temple. In October 1965, Bishop Quezada blessed the crypt and declared it Acapulco's expiatory church. Before we go on to what we call the second stage of his life, when he decided to remain in the church of all times, in the one he was formed, allow us to transcribe the feeling of gratitude, a reflection of his kind soul, that Father Carmona always kept for his mother and teacher. Quote, "I thank the humble and rural teacher that was my adopted mother, Natividad Carmona Sanchez, who made so many sacrifices to form me, and above all, because from my childhood she instilled in me the habit of life of sacrifice and austerity. I also want to thank all my father's sisters for their good example and for their correcting me. My teachers in the seminary hold a very special place in my heart, especially the Honorable Canon Constantino Arizmendi, Father Angel Lopez Ariano, Father Nicholas Arzate, the Honorable Canon Abraham Flores, and very virtuous Canon Tomas Herrera. To His Excellency Bishop Leopold Diaz Escuadero goes all my heart and my most fervent prayers and my gratitude for his very wise fatherly advice." End quote. On a certain day between 1969 and 1970, Bishop Quezada asked Father Carmona to celebrate the new Mass like everyone else, to which he answered, "I cannot betray the church that gave me baptism and also made me a priest." When Bishop Quezada insisted that he obey, Father Carmona repeated, "In this case I shall not obey, because faith is before obedience." Upset, the bishop asked him to resign from the parish, but Father Carmona refused. His traditional position eventually became clearer with the friendship he had with Father Sainz Arriaga, and also the frequent visits between the two priests. Informed about this friendship, Bishop Quezada frequently reprehended him by phone, requesting him to end his association because Father Joaquin was excommunicated. The strong priests questioned Bishop Quezada. From what church was he excommunicated? From Christ Church or from the new one? Father Carmona's course was already determined by the middle of the 1970s. He wanted Monsignor Lefebvre, who was going to visit Mexico for the first time, to bless the Divine Providence Church that was now practically finished. As the French bishop's entry into Mexico was denied, in his absence, a representative of Monsignor Lefebvre celebrated a solemn Mass on December 8, 1976. Even though Bishop Bello threatened and excommunicated anybody that would assist, the faithful packed the church. Father Carmona's audacious determination was the straw that broke the camel's back. His foreseen excommunication was officially signed by Bishop Bello on April 30th, 1977. With regard to this matter, the unwavering priest wrote, quote, "From what church was I excommunicated? I can't be from Christ Church because he doesn't belong to this church anymore. And it can't be from the new one because I'm not a member of that church. I thank God because, as undeserving of it as I am, he gave me the grace of keeping my faith and of being able to shout it out with all the strength of my soul." The biological sketch. To know the personal biological data is not enough to know all about his personality, and furthermore, to really appreciate it when it was about such a singular man as in the case of Monsignor Carmona. Usually in biographies of heroes, their magnificent works are enhanced, works the world knew and cheered. However, in saints' biographies, even though some of them may not be canonized, it is precisely the most simple acts, the unknown ones, their daily acts, that define the magnanimity of their souls, their holiness. For this reason, we want to present a biological sketch of our dear bishop that will permit us to know him better, what he was, how he felt, what his thoughts were, how he behaved. It will be his closest faithful who will let us know. Among the testimonies, it is an anonymous one, a young man who helped Monsignor Carmona for some years and composed a brief history on the 4th anniversary of his death. There is also Father Martin Gomez Bravo, who as a child was his altar boy and in his youth his chauffeur. Another is from Miss Ana Maria Estrada Carrillo, Monsignor Moises Caroma Rivera's adopted niece, who lived her childhood and youth at his side. Also, there are testimonies from the closest faithful and collaborators, such as Serenia Bravo Moran, Father Martin Gomez's mother, Mr. Fabian Mojica, Mr. Juan Gutierrez Moreno, both of them his close collaborators for 26 years. Mr. Marilio Sanchez, Mrs. Clementina Herrera de Valdez, and Mrs. Felicitas Mojica, and Miss Guadalupe Guzman de Lopez. Monsignor Moises Carmona was an upstanding and exceptional man. His appearance was serious and respectable. He had great intelligence and talent, was well educated and eloquent, demanding of himself and others, with great valor and leadership qualities, and most of all with a firm faith. But truly what always distinguished him was his strong temperament, united with his simplicity, modesty, interior happiness, and charity. Monsignor Carmona was a man convinced and devoted to his faith and his priestly vocation. He lived as he promised the day of his ordination, to live for Christ and his church and to die to the world. Monsignor Carmona lost interest for worldly things, even essentials. His food was frugal. He had ceased eating red meat for many years. His sleep and his rest were uncomfortable. He would sleep on a bed made of wooden boards with a straw with a straw mat on top, and he arose at 4 in the morning. His clothes were so plain that he would pass unnoticed. To him, money was so despicable that he would say, quote, "Money is the devil's excrement." His house, his furniture, everything looked like its owner, modest and humble. He was so unheeding of worldly goods that it looked as if his purpose was to resemble the life of St. Francis of Assisi. Monsignor Carmona wanted to be poor, even though some people suggested real and proper comforts suitable to his priestly and episcopal position. He cared so little for money that he used to say it was enough to only have 1 coin in his pocket. What he really needed money for was to help his congregation, those in need of school materials, uniforms, tuition, expenses. He helped a lot of children and young people, and so they could continue their studies. He even helped them find scholarships in various prestigious schools and universities. He raised and educated several girls whose parents had no means of support, giving them home, education, and formation until they were able to care for themselves. They thankfully rewarded him by doing household chores and administrative work. He was also austere in his entertainment and social relationships. Even though he felt a profound sympathy for his congregation, he would socialize more with them at church than at private events. In fact, it was unusual for him to accept invitations to eat at their homes. The most he did was to go and eat at a deserted beach in the company of Father Bravo and another priest. As a hobby and also as physical exercise, he used to walk on the beach at 5 or 6 a.m. All the beach, all the stars, all the sky for himself. How many beautiful reflections must have arisen in Monsignor Carmona's heart during those lonely walks. For his rest, as he said, he slept only a few hours. An anonymous author of a biographical sketch of Monsignor Carmona says, quote, "Sometimes the one who writes this was a witness of these sacrifices the bishop made. I would wake up and hear the distant sound of his prayers and sometimes his fiery chanting in Spanish and Latin, dedicated to Jesus and the Blessed Virgin." End quote. Adding to this weighty routine was the frequent sleepless nights resulting from visits he would make to distant towns to offer the Holy Mass, administer the sacraments, and teach catechism. Monsignor Carmona endeavored to arrive early in these towns. In order to do this, sometimes he had to schedule his departure from Acapulco at midnight, 1 or 2 a.m. And after traveling all night, he would begin with a talk for the adults immediately after. And after he would teach catechism to the children. Last but not least, he would officiate the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Before leaving, he would accept without complaint the humble breakfasts the faithful would generously provide for him. It is possible that the pace of these activities may pass unnoticed for some, but not for those who have lived through it. When, because of his advanced age, Monsignor Carmona was unable to continue these trips, one of his young priests who replaced him for a while was greatly impressed by Monsignor Carmona's physical strength and his ability to maintain such a schedule for so many years. These heroic apostolic travels made Monsignor Carmona a real apostle in the state of Guerrero. It would be idle to think he did this evangelical labor for fame, economic interest, or personal reputation. Nothing could be further from the truth. Monsignor Carmona plainly and simply went wherever he was called. Indeed, that is how it happened. Many towns had been abandoned by the official hierarchy for many years, perhaps because these towns were far from the cities or because the clerical loss of interest and faith. And when people heard Father Carmona would come, where he was needed. Even though their towns were remote, the humble faithful, although many of them were natives, would call Monsignor Carmona, hoping to receive their spiritual food that they hadn't had for many years. One visit from Monsignor was enough for the people to become faithful to him. His modesty and apostolic zeal would conquer them in much a way that they didn't want any other priest but him. Monsignor Carmona was also faithful to them because once he was committed, nothing would stop him from going back. Not illness, not rain, nor bad roads, nor threats of any kind. His spiritual children, as he lovingly called his faithful helpers, also say that not even bad colds, high temperatures, or fastings would make him miss his appointments. And though they would advise him not to visit someone when he was ill, he would answer, "They're waiting for me, and if I don't go, who will go?" For these reasons, in less than 6 months, Monsignor Carmona won over the following towns: Dos Lirios, Plain de Pierna, Santiago, Cabeza de Arroyo Nuevo, Arroyo de Cocodrilo, Plan de Marito, and different ones. I'm not going to read all those names because I know I'm butchering these names. As we were saying, Father Carmona was unconcerned about his health, that he practically never went to the doctor. He tried to take care of his health by a good diet, excluding red meat, and curing his discomforts with herbs. Now, only on 2 occasions was he hospitalized, undergoing surgery for a hernia. After surgery, the nurses were about to provide an anesthetic for pain, but he would pretend not to be in pain, so that he wouldn't give him more medicine. And as he said, how was he going to accept it if our Lord Jesus Christ suffered much pain on the cross without painkillers? And then when Monsignor Carmona got out of the hospital, he didn't rest as he should have. The next day, after surgery, he officiated the Mass, even though he would have to stretch his arms in order to reach the tabernacle. This opened his wound, so he had to undergo surgery again. Aside from this, and because of old age, suffering from swelling from his feet, his health was so stable that sometimes he used to say that he was going to die, not going to die from illness, but by an accident, and so it came to be. Monsignor Carmona was demanding of himself and others. He liked things to be done as they should be done, especially things related to doctrine. For example, when he was about to give Holy Communion to people he didn't know, he would ask them when they had gone to confession, if it was a long time, and he would deny it to them hearing their confession after Mass. Monsignor Carmona was very careful with the children's catechism. He developed a catechism to better prepare the children for First Communion. Now this catechism is the same one, as we shall later see, that he placed before certain authorities on the subject to be checked. The catechism classes were divided by groups, depending on the children's level. And at the end of each cycle, Monsignor Carmona got all of them together and personally gave them the last talk. He celebrated First Communion on the Feast of the Assumption, August 15th. And after morning Mass, Monsignor Moises Caroma would take all the children, without their parents, to a garden or a country house, offering them cake and chocolate for breakfast, and they would celebrate the big event all the day long. And he did this not only for the children's amusement, but with the intention that it would be a retreat so that they would remain in the state of grace throughout the beautiful day. With regard to his demand on himself, besides the discipline he imposed on himself, where meals and rest are concerned, every day he would subject himself to read and study. His faithful said he would always be reading and writing, whether preparing for the sermon of the day or preparing his ministry, or in the study of the crisis in the church. People far and wide not only recognized the religious culture of Monsignor Carmona, but also his prudence and wisdom. Not in vain, before his confrontation against Vatican II, many priests from Acapulco would come to him asking advice about different matters. Even when Father Carmona was under Bishop Monsignor Quezada orders, the bishop appointed him to be the official orator at the solemn mass on the feast of the Soledad, titular feast of the cathedral. When Bishop Carmona was still a priest, he enjoyed a good relationship with his brother priests and also with his superiors without taking advantage of this to achieve a better position. Like the rest of them, he would attend the monthly reunions that the bishop would convene. The bonds of friendship Father Carmona had with his priestly brothers was so sincere that when he decided to defend the Church of all times, what hurt him the most, more than the excommunication, was that his old associate, teachers, and friends turned their backs on him and left him alone. In reality, they not only abandoned him, but became his enemies. And Monsignor Carmona's spiritual will talks precisely about the heated controversies he had with them. Nevertheless, this did not prevent Bishop Quezada and Bishop Bello from visiting Monsignor Carmona a couple of times in order to discourage his fight and to convince him to submit to the hierarchy. Both of them failed in their attempts, and it was Monsignor Carmona who tried to convince them that their attitude was not correct. He insisted that faith must come before everything. If anything, the one who won in these interviews was Monsignor Carmona. According to Miss Anita Carrillo, when Monsignor Quezada retired from his position and came to say goodbye to him, he admitted, at least implicitly, that Monsignor Carmona's position was the correct one. Thanks to his enterprising and preserving temperament, he turned a little shack in the middle of a palm grove into a worthy expiatory temple in Acapulco. This achievement constitutes a great merit to Monsignor Carmona and his faithful, who, without funds from the diocese, with only their work and effort, managed to build this beautiful church, starting with the foundation stone. And for this purpose, Monsignor Carmona asked his faithful for cooperation, not with money, but with construction materials, so that every week each family would bring a sack of cement or the required material. In order to raise funds, the faithful organized charity fairs every Sunday in the Zocalo, or the town square. The festivals would be very healthy because it was not necessary to have alcohol in order to enjoy a good time. Monsignor Carmona wouldn't allow alcohol. The beverages would be donated by a soda company. And with much effort, this is how the faithful, some of them workers of the Central Market, built the Divine Providence Church. When Monsignor Carmona because his position was considered rebellious and schismatic, a group of 300 faithful from San Cristobal, led by Pedro Curi, head of the Carcelists, tried to snatch the Blessed Sacrament from Monsignor Carmona's expiatory church as a sign of triumph. Everything was in vain. The traditional faithful watched day and night to protect the church and its priest, and for this reason the multitude could do nothing. The faith and virtue of Monsignor Carmona was well known by all. However, as it usually happens to pure souls, he was not exempt from the calumnies of those that tried in vain to discredit him. As we shall see, God himself was in charge of putting those sharp tongues in their place. In Coyuca, for example, his enemies started a false story about him. Because of this, a man had decided to kill Monsignor Carmona. One day our bishop was walking toward a river, and behind him this man was walking. When he tried to cross the river, the tide carried him off. Courage was another virtue that distinguished Monsignor Carmona. His faithful would say he was not even frightened of the devil. His life was full of persecution, calumnies, threats, even death threats, robbery, and blows. But none of these stopped him. These adversities never interrupted his activities and his apostolic labor. There were times his own assistants suggested not to go to some towns because his life could be in danger. As a challenge, he would answer, "Who should be fearful?" His faithful had no other recourse than to accompany him. His extensive correspondence, which will be mentioned next, is a clear testimony of the strength of Monsignor Carmona's faith, which was above friends, superiors, or the secular press. On one occasion, a priest dressed very elegantly in marine attire arrived in Monsignor Carmona's church. He was a chaplain of a ship that had just docked in Acapulco and was soliciting Monsignor's permission to offer Holy Mass. Monsignor accepted with the condition that he should celebrate Mass the same way he did, because he, the chaplain, should know how to officiate it correctly. The chaplain saw how Monsignor Carmona officiated, and so he did in the same way, in Latin. At the end, the chaplain went to Monsignor Carmona and said, "Father, you are very brave," referring to his still celebrating Mass according to the Quo Primum of St. Pius V. Monsignor Carmona, as always, answered concisely, "Father, this is not a matter of courage. It is a matter of faith, and you are lacking in faith." This is precisely what Monsignor Carmona was most proficient in, his faith, and it was this faith that made him defend the Church of all times. When Father Carmona received from his superior orders to celebrate the Mass of Paul VI, the Novus Ordo, he obeyed, probably with the meekness and confidence he used to have in superiors. But after celebrating it for a few months, Father Carmona confessed to his faithful friends that there was something in the new Mass and in the recent changes that didn't convince him, that he felt reluctant and uncomfortable and remorseful. At that time, the writings of Father Joaquin Sáenz Arriaga and Enrique Salinas, a journalist, affected his conscience. However, at this time, obedience to his superior weighed heavily on him, and this is why his conflict of conscience became worse. This dilemma. Father Carmona determined to ask the Blessed Virgin Mary, to whom he was so devoted, that she would reveal to him a sign to know if he should continue or not with the new Mass. And Father Carmona confirmed to Miss Bravo that he received a sign through the moon, even though he never explained what it was about. The following Sunday, Monsignor Carmona told the parishioners that they would go back to the Latin Mass. Almost all the parishioners stayed with him, and as soon as Monsignor Carmona found out that in a bookstore in Guerrero that the Latin Spanish missals on clearance, that they had Latin Spanish missals on clearance, he sent Mrs. Maria Carrillo to purchase them. His faithful tell us that Monsignor Carmona was very zealous about things pertaining to God and to the altar. He himself was in charge of preparing everything before he celebrated Holy Mass. He had special devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and Our Lady of the Holy Rosary, before whose images he would kneel down and pray. As parish priest, Monsignor Carmona promoted nocturnal adoration, the Legion of Mary, the Guild of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and the Third Order of St. Francis. What distinguished him most were his speeches about the crisis in the church that he gave to the faithful after Sunday Mass, or on Saturdays. He used a chalkboard to graphically present the deviations the modernists made to the doctrine and the consequent birth of the new church that was not Catholic but modernist. With the purpose of not prolonging and extending this biographical sketch and allowing the letters of Monsignor Carmona to speak for themselves, we will end by mentioning about a strong wish Monsignor Carmona cherished all his life. He wholeheartedly wished one day to kneel at the feet of Our Lady of Fatima. Now, some weeks before his lamentable death, on his last trip to Europe, God granted him this wish to visit her. Upon his return to Mexico, he could not cease sharing with his faithful the happiness he felt after prostrating before the image of his venerated Virgin, as he told her, "Mother, you can now take me."